conference again so that everyone out there is aware, straight from the horse's mouth, about what happened. And I'm here on site. I'm Katie Moore, along with Mike Perlstein, investigator David Hammer, joining us live from out where the sheriff just wrapped up that news conference. David, what were your main takeaways?
Yeah, Katie and Mike, my main takeaway is that they are looking at this as an inside job. You know, the sheriff started off her press conference talking about political attacks, probably referencing a number of things, including that Jason Williams put out his endorsement against her today while this was going on. But again, all of that seems kind of irrelevant overall if we're talking about people on the inside, sheriff's deputies who are responsible for watching this pod and watching over the inmates, allowing this to happen or knowing that it was happening. And that's definitely the suggestion here from the statements from both the sheriff and Chief Mallett, that they are looking at this as a potential inside job. And, you know, they talked about how they needed more help with maintenance, they needed more help with the locks on these cells and everything. But again, the ability to get out and use potentially heavy equipment or some kind of equipment that would make noise, as I asked during the press conference, to get the plumbing removed and get out of there, someone working behind the wall to help them get out. All of these things suggest that people inside and on that night shift knew about it. And they talk about also a potential, shortage of deputies to really keep an eye on things. They talked about 32 who were on staff for that overnight shift. But again, 7 hours from 1 o'clock, 7.5 hours from 1 o'clock to 8:30 before the leadership at the jail were aware that this escape had happened. And then you see additional, as she gave the timeline, you saw additional delays. Each one that she said she needed to gather more information to be sure and really account for who was missing. But you have a delay from 8:30 until 9:30 before they notified the marshals to make sure. They said they had to make sure that these escapees were not somewhere else in the jail before they sounded the alarm. Then you have another 2-hour delay before the NOPD says that they were notified at 10:30. Then the press release goes out to the public at 11:30, and there's another 2-hour delay before we got the mug shots of these escapees, which of course is critical for putting the information out to the public and getting them a chance to help apprehend these escapees. And I want to point out one other thing. She mentioned that one of the people that they put out for hours and hours as one of the escapees, Keith Lewis, was not an escapee. He was still in the jail in another location, and they didn't realize that until the sisters of Keith Lewis actually showed up here wanting to know why their brother was put out as one of the escapees when he was still inside the jail. So all of these are failures that I think the city council and others are going to be looking at. I know there's a hearing scheduled at city council on Tuesday, and we'll be hearing more as they continue to investigate.
Yeah, David, I think she opened the press conference by saying, quote, "It is almost impossible to get out of this facility without help from the outside." So, she, number one, said that. Then she said it's almost impossible to get out of this facility without help from the inside when she started to describe what it would take to make that breach in the bathroom that, they described as a handicap bathroom. It almost seems like that was a well-known blind spot.
Exactly, and there were references by Chief Mallett to doing regular checks every night on these various parts of the pod. But again, that leads us to surmise that there would have been some kind of an inside approval of this or knowledge of this if they were actually doing the checks and didn't notice. And if this took more than a few hours, as we suspect, to remove that equipment, that would mean that someone was derelict in those checks over potentially multiple days leading up to this escape.
Absolutely.
So again, yes, help from the outside. It appears that they got help from the outside. Yes, it appears that the calls for more help with maintenance that weren't heeded, that played a role in this. But again, at the end of the day, it appears that this doesn't happen without help from the inside as well.
Absolutely. And, when you think about the inmate movements here, and when she's talking about how they managed to get, through that wall and into the wall and then out that loading dock, and out onto the outside, hiding behind things in the yard, and then that they managed to know that there was one weak spot in the razor wire on top of the wall, and then managed to get over it. All signs point to this being a long, coordinated escape plan.
Exactly, Katie. And we also know that there have been long-standing issues, not just under this sheriff, but going back under Sheriff Guzman, about fraternization between sheriff's deputies and inmates. Those have been the subject of some sexual harassment and other complaints over the years, dating back to Sheriff Guzman's time, but continuing now under Sheriff Hudson. So this leads us to question, how much control does the sheriff have over her own staff, and keeping tabs on whether the staff that's on is aware of everything and is being watched themselves to make sure that they're not facilitating things like this.
And David, if I could jump in, did the sheriff cut off questioning? Because some of her answers seem to beg a whole list of other questions. She's saying that at 12:23 is when the pod module employees started noticing tampering with the cell doors. 1 a.m. was the actual escape. And I can tell you from being in those pods and how it is configured that there's only 1 or 2 inmates per cell, depending on the security level. And any inmates outside of their actual cell are going to be immediately noticed by that employee who's in a central pod module to notice, obviously, people outside of their cells, much less going to a handicapped cell and going through a hole in the wall.
Well, to answer your original question, there were limits on how many questions we could ask, but we continued to press to try to ask more of those questions and to try to find out more about these delays in notifying the public, but apparent delays in notifying their law enforcement partners. Her basic answer on that was that they needed to kind of get a hold of the situation and understand exactly what was happening before they did that. But again, that doesn't explain, and you heard me at the end of the press conference asking again about the delay in releasing the photographs to the public, which is a crucial part of trying to identify people who are on the loose. And that answer didn't come in terms of saying, well, we needed to get a handle of the situation again. Well, if they release the names of all of the inmates at 11:30 and they don't release the images of them until 1:30, that begs the question, are they prepared? What kind of information do they have to put out, and why are they taking so long? Because those minutes and hours matter when you're trying to do a manhunt on 10 people.
Yes, and I'm just going to be honest here, though. Like, no one at home can really see this all that well, but this is what the sheriff system looks like whenever you pull up somebody's charges or booking information, and the photo is right there with it. So when you pull up this booking information, the photos usually are right there on the page with the person's information about what they're being held on, who they are, their date of birth, all those things. So to say that we had to confirm that the photos match the person, it just raises a lot of questions, like you said, Mike. So many questions raised by this press conference, as many as it answered. So